unified Korea would be located among very big superpowers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chancellor. And do you think the reason why the interest of the unification in Korea increased dramatically last year due to Cheonan battleship sinking and Yeonpyeong Island shelling?
I'm not sure about that, but you remember that immediately after the liberation from Japan's colonial rule or immediately after the independence, the rate of supporting people in Korea was almost 100% for national reunification. And it dramatically dropped during the year of democratization in Korea. And maybe, the continuing conflicts between South and North Korea, or continuing provocation from the North side, would stimulate, especially young generation, to have bigger interest in South-North relations, or to stimulate their zeal for the need for national reunification.
Okay, thank you so much for your informative contribution. Next, we'll hear from Ambassador Vunokov. Will you care to speak?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Kwak. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. More than 2 decades ago, the fall of the Berlin Wall in Germany marked the end of the Cold War, the history of fierce fight of 2 superpowers and their allies, as well as the start of the reorganization of international relations based on the democratic principles. Unfortunately, these positive changes didn't affect the Korean Peninsula. Sadly, the Cold War is alive and well in Northeast Asia, and especially on the peninsula, where a tough confrontation between not only 2 absolutely opposite social and political systems, but also among the biggest military groups in the world, armed with the modern weapons on both sides of the 38th parallel, continued for more than 60 years. In fact, the peninsula balances on the verge of military and political crisis, when any tiny reason can provoke full-scale war. Unfortunately, the tragic events of last year showed us how unstable and tense the situation is. Sometimes I can hear, when I have meetings with my friends, Korean friends, I can hear some critical voices towards several aspects of my country's policy regarding Korean Peninsula. I would like to answer that Moscow's calls for the conflict parties to reveal maximum restrained, calm and suspended position possesses not only theoretical but very practical sense. The matter is that the situation on the Korean Peninsula directly affects security of the Russian citizens living on the neighboring Far East regions, and of course influences the large-scale rapid development plans for these Russian territories. And by the way, from this point of view, establishment in future of the democratic, prosperous and friendly towards us United Korea, to my estimates, Mr. Lee, you mentioned in future 80 million people, but to my estimate 75 million, but plus 5 million, it's okay, I fully agree. So the establishment of this country, united country, in future fully reflects Russian political and economic interests. So this is my answer to your question. Russia is fully supported. We are convinced that there is no alternative to political and diplomatic settlement of the situation. Moreover, the six-party talks from our point of view, is the optimal mechanism for making necessary decisions on all the issues, including the main issue, nuclear problem. Using our our obvious advantages, in particular, very good relationship with both Korean states and advanced strategic dialogue with the United States, China, Republic of Korea, and Japan, Russia is doing everything possible to normalize the situation on the peninsula, to resume inter-Korean dialogue, and to create conditions to restart six-party talks. Taking into consideration reduction of tensions since the beginning of this year, Russia worked actively with all parties concerned, particularly with the representatives of North Korea. And this February, March, and May, we continued our contacts with the North Koreans, including a special visit of the head of our delegation within six-party talks, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Borodavkin, to Pyongyang, and we achieved certain positive results. In particular, North Korea officially abandoned its preliminary conditions to resume the six-party talks, which were to remove sanctions of the UN Security Council and sign the peace treaty instead of armistice agreement of 1953. And North Koreans also agreed to include so-called uranium enrichment program, UEP, to the agenda of six-party talks. Our other demands, such as imposing the moratorium on nuclear weapons tests and ballistic missiles launches, as well as returning inspectors of IAEA to the nuclear center in Yongbyon, Pyongyang is ready to discuss during the negotiations. Some people may say that it's not enough, but we, in contrary to those who adhere the principle all or nothing, consider that achieved results open the perspective of narrowing the differences in positions of all participants in order to resume the talks. During the conversation with the North Koreans, we expressed our support not only for the renewal of dialogue and arranging cooperation between North and South, but also achieved the confirmation of Pyongyang's interest in discussion of trilateral, that is, Russia, Republic of Korea, and North Korea, economic projects, such as the connection of railways of three countries, construction of gas pipeline, and integrated energy system connecting Russia and the Republic of Korea through the territory of North Korea. We are convinced that this project will be both economically and politically attractive, of course in case of creating of necessary political conditions. As in the first part of this morning discussions, the Japanese representative mentioned, we also agree that economy should be a key. And finally, one more issue which is Russia responsible for. The history of the conflict on the Korean Peninsula, origin and aggravation of the North Korean nuclear problem, last year's tragic incidents in the Yellow Sea, have clearly highlighted the long-felt necessity of establishment of mechanism of peace and security in Northeast Asia. Russia is a chair of a special working group within the framework of six-party talks, and even during the 2 years suspension of the negotiations, we continued to work on the draft of a special document named Guiding Principles, on which such mechanism may be based. Its central idea is a provision guarantees of security to all countries in the region, of course including North Korea, which is known to justify its nuclear program by the threat of aggression from the United States and the Republic of Korea. We are sure there will be necessary in future to make a multilateral document, not only with the political, but also with juridical obligations based on the international law. I consider that such mechanism could become one of the components of the future security architecture in the whole Asia-Pacific region. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador. Next, we'll hear from Ambassador Kozelski.
Very good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me for this important event. I'm still a newcomer in Korea. I arrived, I assumed my post only in January, and it's my first visit in Jeju. Thank you very much for the hospitality. Allow me to make a few points. First one is to reconfirm the interest of the European Union in the security situation on the Korean Peninsula, because very often only neighboring countries plus the United States are taken into account. But I may assure you that the situation on the Korean Peninsula is not a theoretical issue for the European Union, despite the fact that Europe is located far from here. Peace and security on the Korean Peninsula and in East Asia as a whole are important for the European Union's security, political and economic interests. Almost 1/3 of the European trade is conducted with the East Asian countries. The region is a very important direction of the European direct investments. Countries in East Asia are also important partners for Europe in dealing with important political and economic global and regional issues. Last year, the Republic of Korea and the European Union declared the partnership as a strategic one. It means that any serious conflict or any destabilization of the situation on the Korean Peninsula would have ramifications for Europe in political, security, economic and social dimensions. And in this context, the DPRK's nuclear program, any breach to the non-proliferation regime, and any rise of tension on the peninsula represent a direct threat to EU security, and such developments are reasons for our concerns. But consequently, the EU has consistently sought to support efforts aimed at increasing peace, stability and security in this part of the world. In the past, the EU has demonstrated its commitment to non-proliferation and demonstrated its willingness to contribute to the solution of problems on the Korean Peninsula, among others via its membership and substantial financial contribution to the KEDO project. Unfortunately, it didn't work. Following the nuclear tests in 2006 and 2009, EU member states supported UN Security Council resolutions. Last year, we clearly condemned a security incident, the Cheonan sinking and the Yeongbyon shelling. We have maintained and we will maintain a very close dialogue with the Republic of Korea on the situation here. This is our interest as well. And of course, at the same time, there is a clear realization that a dialogue between the Republic of Korea, DPRK, and the major parties in the region is the only feasible way to first limit and then achieve complete dismantling of the nuclear program. We have supported the six-party process and the September 2005 agreement. The EU has not sought to be a party to these talks. However, as I understand, this is my private opinion, we may play some role in the implementation of a possible agreement on denuclearization, for example, in providing some economic support. That's why at a certain stage, we all may consider some kind of our involvement while discussing the implementation of on an agreement on nuclear issues. And of course, the EU continues to hope for resumption of dialogue between all of the main parties. But dialogue cannot simply be for dialogue's sake. The DPRK must use the opportunity to demonstrate that it sincerely seeks denuclearization on the peninsula. This is the core issue. And the next point, the EU maintains limited contacts with DPRK, including through a limited, low-level, working-level political dialogue. And at the same time, over the last 15 years, these contacts have been conducted via humanitarian assistance to the country. The EU maintains the principle that humanitarian assistance is delivered on a needs basis and it's never linked to political issues. But at the same time, the EU does not implement development aid to build the DPRK economy. However, this could be possible in the future, provided progress takes place on the nuclear issue and in respect for human rights. It means that we will be ready to step in. And in this case, especially new member states may also provide assistance and advice concerning possible internal economic adjustments or economic changes in North Korea. We have expertise on this. But Pyongyang must make a choice between membership of the international community with the mixture of obligations and privileges this brings, or isolation and insecurity that results from breaches of obligations. It is clear that without denuclearization, open and sincere inter-Korean dialogue, normalization of relations with other members of the international community, first of all with main players, it's difficult to imagine a real progress towards the reunification. But I would like to be clear that division of the Korean nation is not a natural situation. The Korean nation has the right to live within one state, and this change will occur. How and when this change will occur, it's difficult to predict at this stage. It should be the Korean people who decide on the reunification of Korea. Of course, with support from the international community, which has been emphasized by my colleagues here. And what should be extremely important? That the process of unification should be conducted peacefully. It should lead to the ease of tension. It should contribute to the stabilization in the whole region. There are a lot of preconditions. And in this context, I would like to recall that not long ago, another nation went through the process of reunification. It was Germany. And of course, the situation on the Korean peninsula is